You're listening to the Pithy Chronicle. History with a bite. I'm Caroline.
And I'm Erica. And we bring you history's dirtiest deeds, dripping with sarcasm.
Are you hungry yet?
Welcome back, pithy listeners. I'm Erica.
I'm Caroline.
And today we are continuing our discussion on Mary, Queen of Scots. Unfortunately, Mary, who has had a rather charmed life up until maybe the last 5 minutes of our last episode, is now about to come to one of the darkest times in her life. But not the darkest, that's for episode 3.
So this is part 2.
Part 2. But unfortunately, I do have to give you some trigger warnings that you may not think that you would need, especially for Mary, Queen of Scots. Today we will be discussing assault, rape, miscarriages, and some executions.
Welcome to Scotland. Just kidding. I really like Scotland. Please don't.
It is 1561, and we are going to bid adieu to France.
Bon voyage!
Mary wrote to her Scots nobles informing them of the death of her husband, indicating that she was considering returning home and requesting their advice on filling various public roles in Scotland. She was also asking for the royal accounts to be sent to her so she could study and make sure she knows her business.
Because she's really never acted as anything for Scotland beyond just a mouthpiece.
Right, but I don't think she had any kind of political sway with her mother.
And certainly half-brother wasn't taking Mary's advice.
No. But she did align herself with James Stuart, her half-brother, and he did advise her to maintain the religious status quo. And as a reminder, the half-brother has ousted Marie de Guise, Mary's mother.
To the point that killed her.
Yeah, he didn't actually execute her, but she died because she was exhausted.
She died of old people disease.
And she's aligned herself with him. The state religion is Protestantism at this point, and he's saying, hey, let's not change it. And Mary signified her willingness to accept this, provided that she could continue to maintain her own Catholic religion in private.
It does harken back to that moderation or freedom of religion that France was really struggling with, and that Catherine and then Mary were pushing on the Catholic community or the Protestant community.
And you kind of see the reverse happening in England, where they are forcing Protestantism with such vigor that Catholics are having problems celebrating their faith.
Yeah.
It could be that she thought James would take the role of a supportive advisor and loving sibling that had been exemplified amongst her Guise relatives.
And there were a lot of women in this Guise family. So while her uncles were doing a lot of work, the women in the Guise family were probably making sure that Mary was taken care of.
Well, and the
like
Guise
her grandmother,
family
her aunts
were marrying up. So they had to understand the value of a woman of nobler or higher rank and what a boon that is.
Yes.
After her period of total seclusion ended, Mary received the English ambassador, who wrote that now the queen was not subject to the submissive role of wife. She was showing herself as having both a great wisdom for her years, modest, and also of great judgment in the wise handling of herself and matters which, increasing with years, cannot but turn greatly to her commendation, reputation, honor, and great benefit of her country, unquote. So he, the English ambassador, goes back and tells this to Elizabeth. And it was the most unsubtle hint to Elizabeth, who was at this point being talked of as headstrong and frivolous and just mired in controversy because of the death of Amy Rossbart, the wife of her favorite Lord Robert Dudley, who she may or may not be having some hanky-panky with.
What was that?
I don't know. I'm
punchy!
It was just not a good look for Elizabeth right now because she hasn't really proclaimed, I'm not marrying. She was still prevaricating a lot on. And so when her favorite, who they at least had a very serious flirtation, if not a full-blown affair, that his wife had died of
fell down the stairs.
Suspicious means. Stairs.
While pregnant.
Essentially, the English ambassador was saying, hey, you might do well to take a hint out of your cousin's book. And Elizabeth was not about to do that. Mary was trying to build bridges with Elizabeth. She is trying hard to be a friend to and build political and diplomatic relations with Elizabeth. But she was not going to ratify the Treaty of Edinburgh, which would renounce her claim and whatever future children's claim she had to the English throne.
She's not just doing this for herself.
Right.
She's doing it for the future generations, i.e. James.
Even though we don't have a James yet.
Even though he's not born yet.
You just don't give up a claim in perpetuity.
Yeah, that's a risky move.
It's a risky move.
Actually, that's a stupid move. Yeah.
Mary told Elizabeth's envoy that now she was a widow and she needed to consult with her Scottish council before she could commit herself. In the meantime, she expressed warm wishes toward her cousin and hoped that they might meet in person to resolve any disputes between them. This is something she comes back to over and over. She desperately wants to meet Elizabeth face to face.
I get that. You get a text from someone that you don't know super well, and you're like, is that exclamation point meant to be happy, or is it angry?
Or she's excited
because she's yelling at me. It's so hard to tell. I totally understand that she wants to make things very clear between these two nations, between the family, etc.
Well, last week we talked about Mary's relationship as a child with Catherine de Medici. And I put forward the idea that it was not necessarily the personal relationship that was strenuous, it was the political relationship. So I think that's what's happening with Elizabeth as well. The letters they exchange, they're very warm.
Beloved cousin, dearest relation. They knew that they were basically all each other had.
In this episode, I have a quote in here about Mary expressing that this is the closest female relative I have, which is sad for both of them. But so much has always been like they were jealous of each other, particularly Elizabeth in the realms of the looks after the whole smallpox situation. But I don't know that that's necessarily true. So they're trying to resolve these disputes, but Mary could not accept Elizabeth formally as the Queen of England until Elizabeth accepted her as the legitimate heir.
Honestly, that makes sense. Elizabeth didn't want to do that because A, Mary was Catholic, and B, that would give any Catholic supporters Mary might have maybe more pressure to assassinate or get rid of in some way.
Yeah.
The Protestant current Queen of Elizabeth, giving her the heirdom, if you will, legitimizes the claim, and Elizabeth wasn't ready for that. Even though in the end, it would have made a lot of sense.
Would have made so much sense. But even though later in life, Elizabeth is quoted as saying, "How could I love my own winding sheet?" That's one of the reasons she says she doesn't want children. At this point, she's still incredibly young, not even out of her 20s.
Yeah.
Even until her 30s, she's having these discussions about getting married and entertaining
She's doing
suitors.
that in her mid-40s, up to her 50s. She was
Yeah.
like, I guess I could pop out a kid for England.
At this point, she has not proclaimed herself the Virgin King. She is very much a fertile myrtle. As we've said, Mary was considering going back to Scotland. She had not made up her mind at this point. Her preferred option was a marriage to Don Carlos, the son of Philip II of Spain.
Her former brother-in-law.
Yeah.
By marriage.
It's not through blood, though.
I wasn't referring to incest. I was just saying they're all interrelated.
Yeah. Allegedly, Catherine de Medici was secretly opposed to this and wrote to her daughter Elizabeth that she should discourage such a match. Catherine warned Elizabeth to be wary of Mary, her childhood friend, if she became Carlos's wife. Elizabeth might be sidelined.
Yeah, Carlos was the heir. It's easy to
There's
see.
not an indication as to why Catherine said it, because anybody who married Don Carlos would have done this. Why not have it be your childhood friend that you could be a team with? Perhaps Catherine's real motive was her desire to promote her younger daughter, Marguerite, to the role.
Again, parents are willing to do a lot. They'll throw a lot of people under the bus to protect their children.
I'd throw a whole bus under a bus to protect my kid.
There you go.
The marriage situation was not to be had with Don Carlos. Apparently, Elizabeth listened to her mother, and Mary decided to go home. The populace, when she arrived in August of 1561, was delighted at the sight of their beautiful young queen. Music was played outside of her palace chamber. The snooty French envoy complained about the appalling noise, but
if you are used to medieval French music and then you're getting Scottish bagpipes, that's a difference.
It is certainly a different sound.
Now, when you go to Scotland, it feels like you're being welcomed by this tradition. But I can see at the time, and I can see for the French, yeah, no.
I'm sure for the French, it did seem like the backwater.
It makes that whistle sound when you're not even playing it.
He complained about the noise. Mary was probably thrilled that her people were so welcoming, and she actually requested a repeat performance the next day.
Let's do it again!
She was presented with the keys to the city, a Bible, and a book of Psalms. The celebrations were blatantly Protestant and attacked Catholicism that day. They had constructed, Caroline, a cloud for a child to float down from to present this Bible and book of Psalms to Mary.
Well, that's cool.
It's cool, but think about it. None of them were really sure what the Catholic Queen was going to do when given a Protestant Bible and a Protestant Book of Psalms. And so instead of just being men about it, they made a kid do it.
Oh, that is bad.
Then at the second location, they also had a sermon preaching against Catholicism, but then they had a children's choir singing Calvinist hymns.
Whoa. I think that the word welcoming was too strong. I think it was pomp and circumstance, but it was pointed and it was a bit of a test. What's she gonna do?
Well, she had already said, I'm not changing anything.
Yeah, she'd said that in a letter, but it's all men running the show there. I'm sure they were like, women, they get an idea in their head and they just run wild with it. We can't trust her to do what she says.
It's so shocking how much they did not trust the fact that she had a hoo-ha. She's a liar and a temptress.
Is it that time of the month?
It wasn't a bad entry. People were genuinely happy. There was no jeering. There was no violence. But there were storm clouds ahead. And within the first week of her arrival, there were issues. Only 14 months previously, Catholicism had been the accepted religion of the country.
Wow.
And probably most Scots were still Catholic. Amongst the nobles, however, Protestantism had taken firm root. Mary, as agreed, proceeded to hear Mass in her private chapel on the first Sunday of her return, and the Lord Lindsay immediately made his feelings known by shouting that the priest was an idolater. And Lord James, her brother, maintained the agreement, though, while standing guard so she could fulfill the Mass in peace.
Well, that's nice.
Which is maybe the only decent thing he's ever gonna do for her. Before we go any further today, I have to introduce the villain of this hour, John Knox.
Oh my God, your face just saying his name. It's like she just spit at me.
What is known of Knox's early life is limited, but it was characterized largely by poverty and health issues, which undoubtedly provided a foundation for his struggle for change. Knox chose to achieve a better status for himself, using his passion for Protestantism to embrace his social position and improve his finances.
So he's totally doing it because of his beliefs.
To be as much of a firebrand as he is, he certainly has some pocket-lining tendencies. Knox blamed the economic grievances amongst the poor upon those who had political power to change the situation, which is not totally radical.
Not totally wrong.
Knox experienced the loss of his peers, Patrick Hamilton and George Wishart, in that very... Remember back in episode 1?
Wishart was burned at the stake.
Burned at the stake on Marie de Guise's orders.
4th of July fireworks.
Let's just say John Knox was very friendly with the folks who ended up beheading Cardinal Beaton.
Ooh.
Knox did leave his mark on the English church through his involvement in the English Book of Common Prayer, which was later adapted by Queen Elizabeth in her restoration of the Protestant church. Thomas Cranmer describes Knox and other radicals as, quote, unquiet spirits, which can like nothing but that which is after their own fancy, and cease not to make trouble and disquiet. They're in it for themselves, and they only want what they want.
They are actively trying to be annoying to the people around them.
Right. Mary was very unfortunate to have him as an adversary. He was militant in his Calvinist beliefs, and he was even more misogynistic than most men of the age, which is saying something.
That is saying something, considering that there's a woman on half of the Protestant thrones.
And he spent most of his time railing against female rule in delightful tomes, such as the first blast of the trumpet against the monstrous regiment of women.
Oh my.
That was the title. Just the title.
Well, I do like the trumpet aspect. I do feel like women needed to trumpet there.
Yeah, but do you know what the trumpet is in reference to? The end of the world. Revelation Armageddon trumpets.
Oh. It's not like heralding.
No, it's heralding the end of the world.
Cool.
Yeah. He would just berate Mary in public and in private. Knox made the most of every innocent pastime derived from youth and high spirits at the Queen's court to insinuate that the Queen and her entourage lived immoral lives. He demonstrated that the Scottish Kirk, or the Scottish Church, had been led by corrupt and foreign leaders, and that the country needed reform and change for its own advancement and religious morality. Ooh. And I even have a quote.
Of course you do.
I have a quote, my friends. We see our country set forth for a prey to foreign nations, and we hear the blood of our brethren, these members of Christ Jesus, most cruelly to be shed, and the monstrous empire of a cruel woman, unquote.
He's giving women a lot of power. Evil power.
But power.
I mean, we gotta take something.
Mary summoned the Protestant Reformation leader 5 times to answer allegations he made against her. Eventually, on the 5th time, she rather boldly accused him of provoking an armed revolt, which led to the deposition of her mother and her death. And Knox went so far as to say that although women had no business being sovereigns, if her people accepted her and she did not bring the country to ruin, he would be content to live under her, as St. Paul had lived under Nero.
I cannot believe she didn't just...
It sounded fun!
Until the Nero part. Yeah, living under Nero would be rough. Why did she not just find a dungeon?
I have no idea.
She's queen.
It had to be because...
He must have been protected by the Protestant nobles.
Here's the deal. Not only was he friendly, not friends, but friendly with her half-brother James and the Kirk, but do you know who he happened to have a close relationship with? Do you want to just guess?
Elizabeth? Although I find that hard to believe.
Yeah. Actually, Elizabeth was pissed at this article too. Did not like it. But he was buddies with William Cecil.
Oh, that guy.
Who was Elizabeth's secretary at the time. And we will get into the nitty-gritty of William Cecil next week. He is the most disgusting human I think that I've ever researched. And I did Ivan the Terrible on our first season.
Good point.
And I also was the one who did Vlad the Impaler. And he might be more slimy than them.
Wow.
Yeah.
We're putting him on the villain list.
And while not super friendly with him at this point, he was friends with Walsingham, who was Elizabeth's spymaster later in her reign.
So incredibly well connected to the point that Mary was not willing to risk.
Right.
Oh no, he fell down the stairs.
If only he could have taken an Amy Rothsbart. Mary did hold her own during the meeting, but when Knox left, she broke down in tears, which...
Fair. I think even a man at the end of that would have been like, that was mean.
Well, she's an 18-year-old girl being likened to Nero, who set his entire city
aflame,
on fire?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. She probably had not ever been spoken to in that way.
Oh, I'm sure not.
And again, she had no interest in bringing Catholicism back as the national religion. She was so far from wanting to reimpose Catholicism in the country, she made financial provisions for the ministers of the Reformed Church. Scottish kings had an interesting relationship with the papacy. They were able to say who got what appointments. That was not the case in maybe continental Europe, as we saw with a lot of the Holy Roman Emperor BS.
Please just crown
season
me.
2. If an office were vacant, the Scottish king could keep the revenues, and it was agreed that the current incumbents could remain in the post and keep their incomes regardless of whether they were able or willing to carry on Protestant services, and that any remaining revenues would be divided between the crown and the ministers of the Protestant church.
She's paying their salaries, and he's still screaming at her.
She is taking revenues that rightly could go into her own purse for someone who is actively persecuting her.
Preaching against her.
Yeah.
I wish I would be that nice. I don't think I would.
I'm not. Even if she hoped things would change over time through her pious example, her main focus was not religion. She had no interest in returning the country to the Catholicism. Her main goal in the first maybe 4 years of her reign was to secure the agreement of Elizabeth I that Mary was her legitimate heir.
So, while I think it is great that she was like, I should focus on what my actual job is and not the religion aspect, at the same time, I don't know that her main focus should be getting a different crown, a better crown. Wouldn't you think the main focus should be legitimizing Scotland and creating a booming economy that supported the Protestant ministry?
That's the thing. She is dealing with the economy. It wasn't just the legitimizing the heir. It was uniting crowns. It was building that diplomatic relation. And she was managing the finances and the religious reformation. For some reason, though, the Protestants thought that she was just negging them, and she's not. She's actively giving them revenues, money that she does not have to give them. I think she thought that if she continued to be gracious to the Protestants and continue to pay them, they would see that she's not trying to take their religion away. She just wants to be able to be Catholic herself and have some religious tolerance, which, my God, would be so nice.
And yet.
In the summer of 1562, we see her really trying to woo Elizabeth.
Did she send flowers?
Yeah, actually. Elizabeth had initially refused safe conduct for Mary when she was coming over from France, but changed her mind and dispatched one. But Mary had already been like, well, I guess I'm not getting safe conduct. I guess I could just go. But she really saw it as a friendly overture. And
better late than never.
Within 2 weeks, Mary sent her minister, William Maitland, to go south. Maitland was a Protestant and was a close associate of Lord James, her half-brother. He was also an acquaintance and even a friend of Sir William Cecil, Elizabeth's chief minister, the scum of the earth. Mary believed a face-to-face meeting, again, would convince Elizabeth to name her as heir. Arrangements were well advanced for that summer to actually meet when England became embroiled in the French Wars of Religion.
Oh, those things.
Yeah.
All 9 of them.
All 9 of them. And then Elizabeth contracted smallpox, delaying a meeting still further because she thought she was dying.
That would be bad. Although then you might want to get your ducks in a row and, have an heir.
And I think there was a lot of folks holding their breath because...
Including Mary.
Right. What are you going to do if she dies? Because she has not named an heir. Rightly or wrongly, Mary depended very heavily on her half-brother and Lord Maitland. They were chief members of her Privy Council, which had the same legislative power as Parliament. In theory, 6 privy councillors were to attend the Queen and transact business, but James and Maitland soon had significant power.
More than the rest.
Whilst her councillors were transacting much of the day-to-day business, Mary was re-establishing court life that her father and grandfather had enjoyed. Hunting, hawking, archery were all regular pastimes, and dancing.
Oh no.
Which was something...
Oh no.
Yeah. Oh yeah, you see where this is going.
Mary. Sometimes you do just want to be like, think it through.
I'm sorry.
I disagree with the notion that we shouldn't be able to dance and have fun and that it can't be fine with God. But I am saying she knew that these Protestants were very much no frills, no...
But they weren't Baptists.
Well, not yet.
Baptists and the earlier Anabaptists They were the ones who really were no dancing. But Mary was really good at dancing, and she liked to dance. And my God, there had always been dancing.
Last week, she was a very vigorous woman. She liked to hunt and to hawk and to dance. She came from the French court where frivolous equals fine. Not just fine, but encouraged.
It crept into John Knox's waxy old ears that Mary had been dancing past midnight.
Waxy with lots of curly hairs.
Outraged at the bad example she was setting, he attributed her high spirits to the news of renewed persecutions of the Huguenots in France.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Not everything is about you, John Knox.
Knox denounced her from the pulpit, and of course Mary then calls his ass to Holyrood.
Get your butt over here. Yeah. Call me Nero again.
Call me Nero again, bitch!
Exactly.
Don't put that in there.
But I want to.
Okay, then just bleep out bitch. Okay. So, Knox ratcheted back somewhat from the wholesale rejection of dancing, provided the dancer did not neglect any duties from God. So dance fine, but you better be in church on Sunday. Mary, in a placatory spirit, told him that she would always be pleased to hear of any faults in her behavior that she might amend.
See, this is such a female response. A king would never say that.
Yeah.
A minister would never be brave enough to say that to a king. But because she was a woman, despite having all this power, all these men were like, technically you have a crown, but you're clearly sinful because you have a womb, so let's fix it.
Even so, do you think Elizabeth I would have stood for that?
I don't know.
I don't. But instead of being a decent human being, Knox responded that Mary could attend his sermons if she so wished.
Yay?
What a self-entitled butthead.
Poo-poo head.
This is where we'll leave Knox for a hot minute, because I just need a freaking break from him and his antics.
Agreed.
In 1564, it was proposed that Mary should take an English husband. And, oh wait, no, here he is. Naturally, John Knox had definite views on the topic and harangued Mary from the pulpit about the inequities of marriage to a Catholic. You need to marry a Protestant. The Queen despaired of him. My God, it's about time.
I'm despairing of him.
She summoned him and told him that her choice of husband was a matter for herself as sovereign. The minister claimed that he had a right as a minister of God to rebuke her and point out the evils in such a match. However little, he added that he liked seeing her cry.
Wait, he said, I just love to see you cry?
Yeah, basically.
Wow. This dude has balls of steel.
Yeah.
Because she could literally and have him skewered.
Yeah. Whew. And she's still fairly young at this point. She was furious and overwrought, in such tears that she says, "What business of yours is it who I love?"
It's interesting that as a monarch, she was still thinking she could marry for love.
And while she and Francis did not have a whirlwind romance, they did have some sort of love.
A happy marriage in the fact that she cared for him and he cared for her.
Well, Elizabeth, of course, had an opinion, and she wanted Mary to marry a Protestant. But she proposed the Earl of Leicester, Robert Dudley, her boothang.
Her booty call.
Neither Mary or Dudley wanted this. Mary was reportedly aghast. Not only was Robert the son and grandson of executed traitors, he was rumored, of course, to have murdered his wife so that he could marry Elizabeth. And all Mary's envoy could say to this bizarre, insulting offer, Mary would not dream of depriving her cousin of her friend.
That's a better way than just hell no.
Dudley proposed a solution. Henry, Lord Darnley.
Interesting that it was Dudley that had to come up with a new plan.
Well, I will also give our pithy listeners a secret.
Ooh.
Are you ready?
I don't keep them well, but sure.
Well... Because this has been such a long and detailed episode, this is still only a 10th of the research that I found. Mary later in her life was sending a lot of letters to Elizabeth, some with potentially fake information, but also a very interesting little tidbit about Robert Dudley's secret marriage, and we will get in.
Oh, she was the one that told Elizabeth?
Spoilers! You gotta go over to our Patreon to hear the full story.
Love it.
For just $1 a month, you can join us in hearing some of the deciphered letters this summer, as well as some background information that we just couldn't fit into our episodes. And let me tell you, it is some juicy stuff. You want court intrigue?
It is Renaissance meets Gossip Girl.
Yeah. Lord Darnley, could he be a good fit? He had actually been sent as a young boy to bring her condolences when Francis died. Darnley was also the nearest male relative to Queen Elizabeth.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's better.
It's not nothing.
And it's promising that the nearest female marrying the nearest male would provide a really great segue for heirdom.
But when Mary met him for the first time, he was a kid, probably 11.
Wait, this kid was 11 when his mother sent him to France?
Yup.
You know what I don't want? An 11-year-old preteen being like, I'm real sorry for your husband's death. As his voice breaks.
When Mary met him for the second time, she thought him, quote, the lustiest and best proportioned lang man she had ever seen.
Ooh.
That's a description.
Yeah, it is.
Well over 6 feet tall, which, of course, we know Mary was 5'11". That would have been a nice change, especially when Francis had been stunted and probably incapacitated on a lot of levels.
And a mouth breather.
Ugh. Darnley had been well educated in the Renaissance mold, able to play various instruments, dance, write poetry, speak elegant French, which...
enticing to Mary.
Unfortunately, he had been thoroughly spoiled by his parents. He really considered himself deserving of Mary's love and approval and the position King of Scotland. But when you meet a man who is tall and lusty and well-proportioned and he has a swagger, there is a magnetism.
And it's a first meeting.
Right. Narcissists have a magnetism when you first meet them. They gaslight you. It's not until later that you realize what a crappy person they are. And that is exactly the type of predator that Lord Darnley was. Darnley fell ill in the spring of 1565, and Mary took on the task of nursing him. It's at this point things moved from an affection for his merits and his lineage and his Catholicness to a more personal desire to marry him.
He wasn't just an idea, he was a handsome idea, and she wanted to nurse him back to health.
Who doesn't love a sexy work in progress? But you don't marry the sexy work in progress. Listen to me, ladies. You do not marry the sexy work in progress.
Or even worse, the bad boy who's not a work in progress.
You cannot change them.
You get what you get.
She honestly did not anticipate any negative reaction from Elizabeth when this marriage was proposed. After all, the English queen knew the match was a possibility, and Elizabeth had given consent for this. But to Mary's astonishment, Elizabeth claimed to be appalled at the very idea. The Countess of Lennox, Darnley's mom, was sent to the Tower, and Darnley, as an English subject, was forbidden to marry the Queen of Scots and summoned back to England.
Get your Catholic ass back here.
From February to July, they are living in this will they, won't they, but they finally get married in July, and she proclaimed Darnley the King of Scots without the consent of Parliament. The announcement was met with stony silence from all that heard it.
Oh, Jesus.
The populace as well as the nobles. Only Darnley's father cried, God save his grace! Then later that day, the royal heralds proclaimed him Henry, King of Scots. As Mary bestowed the title herself without the consent from the Scottish Parliament, it did not automatically offer the crown matrimonial, which her first husband had enjoyed. She was very clear that even though he was King of Scots, he did not have the right to rule.
Very difficult thing for a man at that time to understand, to accept, and to believe is real. My guess is he was like, okay.
Yeah, whatever you say.
Sign the documents, and then we'll start that issue.
Right.
And that's why Elizabeth never married, because she was afraid that the exact same thing would happen.
Well, I mean...
So let's see how it plays out.
Yeah, it's definitely different this time. Opposition to Mary's marriage arose very quickly.
No.
Only a month.
People didn't like that she married the asshole in secret?
I'm shocked. Her Protestant half-brother James was probably a little worried that his place as her chief advisor was threatened, but on the outside, he really felt like the Reformation was being threatened.
Well, yeah.
And led an attempt to overthrow Mary and her king consort.
Oh. Is that the first of many?
Yeah. While the uprising was more of an armed chase than an outright rebellion, James requested a subsidy from England, so money, in order to protect the Protestant faith. And Mary outlawed him when he refused to attend the Queen, as he had been commanded to do. Mary confiscated his newly awarded lands, and then gathered her troops to march against her half-brother.
You know, it's almost like we're hearing it again, because didn't her mother deal with basically this same damn thing?
Mm-hmm. Except her mother was very interested in keeping Catholicism.
She was a geese.
But Mary was like, dude, this is my honeymoon, leave me alone.
Also, it's my country.
Yeah, that too.
You are illegitimate, and while that means nothing today, back then that was
everything.
Not okay.
While most of Mary's nobles were prepared to support her against James, it was soon apparent that the general misgivings over Henry were not groundless. He wanted all of the pleasures of royalty without any of the work.
Me too.
Yeah, fair.
Just call me Meghan Markle.
Oh my god! That's a hot take. He demanded more money than Mary could afford, and she petitioned Parliament for him to be granted the crown matrimonial. He would hold up public business by spending his time hunting and hawking rather than attending to work as a king. He had taken it into his head, or been fed the idea, depending on who you read, that he was widely preferred as the monarch, obvi, by the nobles and the commoners alike.
He's English, he's Catholic.
No one likes you, dude.
Why would they like him?
He was indulging in public drunkenness, unbecoming to his station, and of course, humiliating to his wife.
Who is already working with these teetotalers.
Don't dance after midnight.
Don't dance after midnight, but I'm sure it's fine for your husband to get raucously drunk.
They hated women more than drunkenness, but drunkenness was pretty high up there.
Mm-hmm.
In between all of that, Mary does find herself pregnant.
Now I have to deal with this.
In some ways, thank God, finally. I never have to sleep with him again.
But it pulls her back from the ability to be as involved.
Mm-hmm.
There were a lot of rules about what pregnant women could and couldn't do, and they had all these confinements that were attached to it. She would be very secluded, and that left who to rule?
Well, it certainly was not her husband, even though he thought it was.
Ooh!
She was willing to give the power to the Privy Council, because there was no way she was not giving any more power to Darnley. Mary was having supper one night with her half-sister, the Countess of Argyll, and a few others, including Rizzio, her private secretary. Her husband entered the room. Moments later, Lord Ruthven bursts in, dressed in armor, and requests that Rizzio go with him, as he had been in Mary's privy chamber overlong. He was in the private chambers of the queens more than Lord Ruthven or Darnley was
comfortable with. Yeah.
Rizzio was probably taking more of the kingly actions that she wished Darnley would do, because Darnley's too busy drinking.
Yeah.
In almost every iteration, Rizzio is gay.
Yes.
He is not interested in anything that she's got going on.
But they were very good friends. She relied on his counsel.
And she's largely pregnant at this point.
No 3-month bump.
At least second trimester.
Height of the hormones.
Mary replied that Rizzio was there at her invitation, and the scene quickly degenerated. It was messy.
Literally.
Mary was grabbed by her husband and held captive while the conspirators burst into her rooms. While Mary was forcibly restrained by her husband, one of the conspirators pointed a pistol at her pregnant belly.
Her child.
The life of the heir of Scotland is being threatened, while her husband, the father of that child, is restraining her.
I really didn't like him, but now I really, 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 really don't like him.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Rizzio was dragged out and stabbed multiple times with the king's dagger to implicate him in the murder, so he could not get out of it. The conspirators were giving themselves some insurance. Do you want to know who
I do.
Those conspirators were?
I do.
Lord Bothwell.
Right, I forgot about that dude.
Mary's third husband. Bothwell, who some of you may know, will also be one of our small bites on our Patreon this summer. He is a dark horse, and not in a positive way,
for
sure, the entirety of Mary's reign in Scotland. Bothwell and the other conspirators escaped during the rigmarole, but Mary was now in a palace controlled by her enemies, with her banished half-brother James en route.
Great. He's coming back.
Mary was left overnight with no one but the Lady Huntley, a widow to an earl who had previously rebelled against her.
That's not great.
But Lady Huntley had taken her husband's death as a fortune of war, and when Ruthven sent her away the next day, she had a letter from Mary to the new Earl of Huntley hidden in her clothes.
The Queen is being held captive.
Just FYI. Mary quickly planned her strategy. Her husband was the weak point in the plot.
Yeah, just get him drunk.
The next morning, she managed to persuade him that his life, as well as hers, were in danger, not to mention their unborn child. And shortly thereafter, who should appear but her half-brother James?
Oh, hey.
Mary did not seem to realize, though, that he could only have arrived so promptly if he had been involved in the plot.
He came too soon.
Don't we hate it when they come too soon?
Indeed we do.
Not realizing this, she just ran into his arms, protesting that if he had been there, she would not have been so mistreated. Which is just so freaking sad, because he was one of the architects of this plan.
And they are siblings.
Yeah.
I know they didn't grow up together. I know that there are different faiths and they have different mothers. But they are siblings. That's just
It's rough. This woman literally has no one she can trust.
There's no one.
She is having to convince Darnley, her husband, the man that held her down while someone held her up at gunpoint. She's having to suck up to him so she can save her life and her unborn son's life. That takes fortitude.
Yeah.
She's savvy. So she claimed to feel labor pains beginning.
That would be early, I believe.
Yeah. The midwife the conspirators had sent for confirmed the queen was indeed in a dangerous state. And later that night, she and her husband slipped out of the palace, taking horses that had been prepared for them by 3 of the household whom she had persuaded to help her, rode 25 miles while having labor pains to Dunbar Castle. And when Mary struggled to keep up, her husband, this piece of shit, told her that it did not matter if she lost the baby because they could make another.
Damn.
From Dunbar, Mary was able to appeal to the few loyal lords, and within 2 weeks she was back in Edinburgh, apparently safe on her throne with the rebels scattered. And James was back by her side, his part in the plot unknown to his half-sister.
I can't believe the others didn't talk. He probably just murdered them before they had the chance.
I would sing like a daggum canary. Mary's son by Darnley, James, was born in Edinburgh Castle after a very hard labor, providing an heir, and thankfully a male one. She did not recover for months and perhaps even years.
I feel her.
Baby James was baptized as a Catholic with enormous pomp, the only occasion during her personal reign when Mary raised taxation. How many people can say that?
Very few.
Elizabeth sent the Earl of Bedford with gifts, and the Countess of Argyll stood as her proxy, as godmother. Pretty intense. Queen of England's your godmother.
That's cool.
A few months later, he was sent to Stirling in accordance with tradition. And let me tell you what, this is the stupidest decision Mary has ever made, in my opinion, because there are 3 rules.
1.
Have possession of the treasury. 2. Be in the capital, the place where the ruler is supposed to be. And 3, have possession of the heir.
Oh, no.
That's it.
That's it.
These are your 3 rules as a medieval Renaissance monarch. Do not be separated from the heir because somebody else is going to have that influence.
And physical possession.
Yeah.
And possession is 9/10 of the law.
8 months later, Mary became extremely ill. So bad they thought she was going to die, and there were prayers for her soul offered in Edinburgh. Mary herself thought that the end had come and sent for her brother and her other counselors to make provisions for her son, and to keep her husband as far as humanly possible away from the crown. Happily or not, depending on who you ask, Mary recovered. But the main problem that she shared with her nobles was her husband. The situations that arose and the events the next few months are pretty disputed. There was a meeting between Mary and her counselors, and they discussed the problem of the king, who was suggested maybe he could go abroad, but you know he's not going to go behave himself. He's going to cause a muck. Technically, there could have been an annulment to the marriage, but if you did that,
James,
his legitimacy would be suspected, just as Elizabeth I had. Maitland suggested that her counselors could find a way with dealing with the problem. And Mary responded that her honor must not be compromised, and that she needed to be assured she would see nothing but, quote, good and approved by Parliament. It's possible that a bond was drawn up binding the lords to the permanent removal of Henry, although James later denied any knowledge of such a document.
Obviously.
In order to have her husband, quote, taken care of, it is alleged that she said, hey, remember when you held me up at gunpoint and murdered my secretary and dear friend?
Yeah.
I could forget that if
you do the same to my husband.
Henry went away. Poof. In January, Mary appeared to have a little bit of a reconciliation with her husband, who had been sick. Apparently, this was a real bad sickness.
She was probably hoping that would just take care of the problem.
Wouldn't that just be the easiest thing?
Why did no one just put a little bit of arsenic in his pudding?
Why didn't she just do what good old Uncle Henry had done and
kill him?
Legally execute him. Legally with really big quotation marks.
Yeah.
Honestly, for him, it wouldn't be that big of a stretch.
No, and I don't think many people would have mourned his loss.
No, I don't think anyone would have.
Except for those doting parents.
On February 10th, Mary and other members of the court visited him, played cards, listened to music, and Mary returned to Holyrood, having promised to attend a wedding. Later that night, Henry was disturbed by just some noise, and allegedly, instead of going to check it out in a normal way, he climbed out his window in his jammies and attempted to leave the house. He was too late. An explosion rocked the house to its foundations, and he himself was found probably suffocated. Can't imagine how this could have happened.
Houses don't generally just spontaneously combust.
Are you sure? Because that's kind of what people said happened.
No, I'm pretty positive.
The enduring question after his untimely death is whether Mary herself was actively involved in the murder.
I think it's a question for the ages. We don't really know the answer.
I mean, if my husband did the things that he did to her, I don't know how she waited that long.
I don't either. It would have been so easy. Arsenic in the pudding.
I would have wanted to squeeze the life out of him myself. Anyway, it is certainly possible that her lords cooked up the whole scheme on their own, and that they would just casually leave Bothwell as the fall guy because he was not well liked either. And that Mary, by refusing to take the easy option and have Bothwell blamed and hanged, whoops, her enemies seized on her weakness to get rid of her as well. Bothwell was tried and acquitted of Darnley's murder, and his next move was to abduct Mary on her return to Edinburgh.
So because she kind of helped him not be hanged for the murder of her husband, he chose to repay her kindness by abducting her.
Yes. Some people say that perhaps she was a willing participant in the plot to be abducted, but that doesn't make a whole heck of a lot of sense to me, because 2 weeks later the couple were married, and Bothwell had divorced his wife just 12 days previously.
Thank goodness someone took care of that paperwork.
So convenient. She was now alienated from her closest advisors in a marriage that was forced upon her.
I do, because I know that is a historical question. There is a debate. Did they plan this whole thing because they were in love and they just wanted to run away, and him abducting her was the only way for her to marry him? But that seems like a far-fetched plan for Mary. She doesn't seem like that type.
Mary is lauded for her piety contemporarily. She did not have premarital relations with Darnley, was too young, of course, with Francis, or maybe didn't even consummate with him. The camp that says she was an unwilling participant in this marriage, which I personally believe, also implies that she was very much raped multiple times by Bothwell.
To make sure that she had to go through with it.
To go through with it, and of course, to hopefully get her pregnant and put his offspring on the throne.
Wow, that's primal and gross.
It's so gross. But Mary refused to divorce Bothwell.
I think that is the reason people have questions.
So here is the kicker. She knew she was carrying his child, and if she were to divorce him,
illegitimate,
there would be no legitimacy. She was harshly treated. An Elizabeth's ambassador, who is not permitted to see her, she is essentially in house arrest, was appalled by the situation. He maintained that only his intervention and the indication that Elizabeth would take Mary's death very badly prevented the lords from dispatching her, aka murdering her. This harsh treatment no doubt contributed to the miscarriage of twins that Mary suffered. While she was lying in her sickbed, severely weakened by the loss of blood, she was bullied and threatened into signing articles of abdication. Subsequently, Mary maintained that as the abdication had been signed under duress, it was not valid.
I agree with her, but that would be a hard argument to make once you have it in black and white.
Yes.
Under duress or not.
I mean, essentially this woman was tortured.
Yeah.
Beaten into a miscarriage. That's violent.
Oh my God.
The easiest thing is to give a false confession just to make it stop.
I am confused as to why her lords turned on her. Was this all because her half-brother was behind the scenes?
It was because of Bothwell. They hated the marriage to Bothwell.
I mean, samesies, but we could have another spontaneous combustion in a couple weeks. Why did we not just get rid of Bothwell?
I'm not sure. One of my articles did say that because of the harsh treatment and the imprisonment, she had probably undergone a certain amount of Stockholm syndrome.
So maybe she was being more forgiving of him than they could imagine.
Yeah.
Or promoting him.
Well, and he was one of the most powerful lords at the time.
Still. For some reason, the men weren't willing to kill the man, but they were happy to torture the woman. Fine. Whatever.
Yeah. All of the Protestants were in on this. Very happy to let her be used and abused in very much a domestic violence situation. But, thankfully, almost a year later,
She's
after
been
this forced
under
marriage,
house arrest and tortured and then imprisoned for a year?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
With the aid of George Douglas, the owner of Loch Leven. Why didn't he just get her out before then? But whatever. Mary escaped and raised an army to face the forces of her brother at the Battle of Langside.
So she's finally figured out the brother isn't so great.
She was defeated very badly, and Mary fled from Scotland. She crossed into England, convinced her cousin and fellow monarch Elizabeth I would help her regain her throne. Elizabeth, however, was unsure how to deal with this unexpected guest and ordered Mary's detention at Carlisle Castle.
I feel that she'll be there a while.
And that is where we end today's episode.
This poor woman.
Truly, her getting married was the worst thing that she could have done. Remarried.
That ever happened.
Yeah, I mean, it was terrible.
And you know what? Elizabeth is sitting there from her seat on the bleachers
watching all of this.
You know, this just doesn't seem like a great plan.
And this vitriol that continues to follow her as a Catholic extremist is just wrong. The idea that she is an inherently bad stateswoman, again, really, really wrong.
And she didn't really have much chance. It's really hard to do great statecraft from your jail cell.
The first 4 years of her reign before she married Darnley were incredibly successful. Obviously, John Knox was pissy, but
she was dancing.
There were not a lot of uprisings. They only started having uprisings when the Chase about raids started, after her marriage.
I mean, she's a martyr, I think.
Men are the ones who are muddying the waters between the two cousin queens. And I do genuinely believe if Mary got her face-to-face meeting, that things would truly be different.
I'm Caroline.
And I'm Erica, and we are Pithily Yours.
This episode is brought to you by the Pithy Chronicle, LLC. The Pithy Chronicle is intended for education, entertainment, and non-commercial purposes. Any views or opinions expressed in this podcast are personal and do not represent those of people, institutions, or organizations that the owner may or may not be associated with in a professional or personal capacity. While we offer lots of sarcasm, this podcast does not offer any advice or services. Listening to this podcast may induce fits of laughter, unexpected distraction, or uncontrollable rage at the subjects, hopefully not at us. We hope you learned something today. If not, so sorry. Please be advised we are not experts in the following fields: medical, legal, financial, technological, thermonuclear engineering, submarine warfare, neuroscience, or cat husbandry. Thanks for listening to our little disclaimer. Just covering our history-loving asses. Bye!